And welcome back, rugby fans, to Rugby 411. I am your host, as always. My name is Joshua Shibata, and this is our power rankings for the MLR after week 8 action and another exciting week in the books. We are nearing we are at the halfway point of the season, coming up with week 9. And man, it is still exciting. It is still anyone's season in both the East and Western Conference. Maybe the Western Conference a little bit more competitive than the East. Remember, 3 teams from each conference gets to go on to the playoffs, so it allows one more team from each side to make the postseason. So a few more teams are eligible, but still lots of action. And especially with what happened just this past weekend, it is still anyone's season. And even those teams you thought maybe might be out of the running can still make a last second half season push for the playoffs. As always, if you are new to my power rankings, remember these power rankings are determined not by the records of the teams. It is by what happens on the pitch, how well a team wins, the strength of their opponents, everything that's gone on now, not necessarily the wins that you had before. A good example would be Seattle. Seattle started off really hot, 3-0, have now pretty much gone down to 1-4 in the last 5 games, and so they have slid quite a bit down in the power rankings. So again, your record doesn't really come into play as much, but again, it kind of does even out. Most of your winning teams are near the top. Your losing teams are more at the bottom. So let's get on with the show. Still in the bottom of the power rankings, unfortunately, number 13, DCO Glory, looked promising in their matchup over the weekend, but unfortunately are still looking for that win. And now that the news just came out, unfortunately for Old Glory, they have parted ways with their head coach, Andrew Douglas, who has actually been the longest tenured head coach in MLR at this point. He was with Old Glory from the very beginning. Unfortunately, they just announced right before I started filming this that he is no longer going to be the head coach of Old Glory. No news on who will take his place. Of course, here at Rugby 411, we wish Coach Douglas all the best, but it kind of makes sense, going 0-7 so far and not really looking very competitive at all, except for maybe like the very first game of the season. There's been some effort, it's kind of very similar to their fellow bottom dweller of the power rankings, the Dallas Jackals, but again, there is definitely some sort of disconnect with Old Glory, and with the way the season is going to go now, losing your head coach, it doesn't look good for Old Glory at all going into the season. I'm a little disappointed because I really did feel that Old Glory might have been able to pull off their first win of the season against NOLA Gold, but that wasn't meant to be, and so they are still at the bottom of the power ranking. Number 12, they had the week off. It's going to be the before mentioned Dallas Jackals. Also, the only other team in MLR right now undefeated. Without a win. And, it's probably not going to get much easier for them. They are going to be going against the reigning and defending LA Guiltinis in their upcoming weekend slates, so probably still going to be looking for that first win, but they're just barely above Old Glory right now. It's gonna take a lot of effort from both of those teams to move themselves out of the bottom. Another team that has slid to the bottom, still not moving from the number 11 spot. the two-time MLR champions, the Seattle Seawolves. They had quite a defeat against the before mentioned also LA Guiltinis, 31-12. Again, started off the season so strong, 3-0. A lot of talk about the return of the Seawall, the return of the two-time defending champions, the only team in the MLR who has won the MLR Shield twice. But now, again, as I said before, they have slid quite a bit. They are now 1-4 in the last 5 games. And yeah, just doesn't look like anything has been working for Seattle, even at Starfire Field, which is where the LA Guiltinis were able to beat them. Very hard place to play in Seattle. Seattle does have that loud home field advantage, but it didn't do much for them against LA, and so they are still at number 11. Still at number 10, the bottom teams did not move at all this weekend, is NOLA Gold. Now, granted, NOLA Gold did defeat Old Glory pretty handedly, 31-17. There was a little struggle at the very beginning, and then NOLA kind of pulled away. But even though the scoreboard says 31-17, it is beating the bottom ranked teams, so not very impressive. So I didn't feel it justified NOLA to move up at all. So they are still at number 10. Sliding down one spot is the very mercurial Utah Warriors. Utah suffering a loss at home against the Houston SaberCats. A very weird game. Houston started out real strong, 3 tries in the first half. Utah scoreless, and then in the second half, Utah being dubbed the cardio kids, the comeback kids, the heart attack kids, were starting to come back, and then Houston just shut the door on them. But the weird thing is, again, there's a lot of talk of what exactly happened. I feel out of all the teams, Utah is the most surprising so far this season. They were so strong last season. I predicted them to be one of the teams in the Western Conference that will be fighting for one of those precious playoff spots. And unfortunately, Utah has not found its way, other than their trashing of the Dallas Jackals in scoring the most points in the history of MLR. But again, that's the Dallas Jackals. And again, there's been a lot of talk of whether or not it's just Utah being more familiar playing at home. Their field is a regulated rugby field compared to a lot of the other fields, which are converted football or soccer fields. But that has been thrown out the window because their last 2 losses have been at home at Zion Field. Again, I feel there is just something going on where you have the 2 best weapons of Utah, 2 of the best players in the league, Mika Kruse and last year's Player of the Year, Mikey Teo, being almost a non-factor in any of their games. Mika did kind of get beat up a little bit in the game with Houston, so that's going to be something that we have to watch out for in the upcoming weeks. But Utah has not found its form at all, and thus has slid down now a spot to number 9 dangerously. Or actually, they're already in the bottom echelon of the teams. Again, as I mentioned before, there's still a lot of games left. We've only reached the halfway point of the season, so Utah still can make a comeback, but they are really going to have to find out what it is that is preventing them from being the Utah team of last year. The second team to be on the bye, there were 3 teams on the bye last week, San Diego Legion, because they didn't really play any games, they don't move, they are still at number 8. Number 7, another team that slid quite a bit, a shocking defeat, is Rugby New York. A really, really weird game. A lot of sloppiness. Don't know if it was due to the weather, though. Rugby New York has played in some horrible conditions in Hoboken and in other places, and yet, I don't feel it looked as horrible as it did in their game against the Toronto Arrows. We'll talk a lot more about the Toronto Arrows with that huge win for them. But man, Rugby New York just looked really, really flat. And they were at home. Don't know really much more to say about it, but I feel the Arrows came in wanting to prove a point, and they just smacked New York around. It wasn't a very high scoring game. There was a lot of sloppiness on both sides, but the Arrows put a lot of pressure on New York. A lot of moments where the scoreboard could have been a lot bigger, but unfortunately, Arrows made a lot of mistakes of their own. Rugby New York weren't able to capitalize on them, but a lot of pressure from the Arrows, and finally that pressure got to Rugby New York, and the Arrows came off with the surprising victory of the weekend. And with that, Rugby New York takes the biggest slide of the week from number 3 all the way down to number 7. Number 6, a jump for the Houston SaberCats from number 9 up to number 6. They basically switched places with the team that they beat, the Utah Warriors. Houston SaberCats, actually they are also kind of like the Utah Warriors, where they're a weird enigma. They impressed a lot of people, including myself, with their win over the LA Guillotines in week number 1. But then have been kind of inconsistent in between then. Their game against Utah looked very much like the team that beat LA. They looked a lot more on form. They looked, again, just like the Arrows team that came in to beat New York. They looked like the team that wanted to win. Though it was a little weird. They scored 3 tries in the first half, and then the second half pretty much was non-existent until the very end. And that was from a try that was caused by an interception. So it really was a sloppy play by Utah that allowed the 4th try for the SaberCats. But still, SaberCats looked very good for at least the first half of this game. They got the win. They got the win away. So that boosted up from the number 9 spot up to number 6. Number 5. Unfortunately, as much as everybody knows, I am a huge fan of this team. I didn't feel that their win allowed them to move up, unfortunately. But number 5, still number 5, your reigning and defending MLR champions, the LA Guillotines. A very commanding win over the Seattle Seawolves in Starfire Stadium. Granted, there was a couple of tries called back by the TMO. And that, if those 2 tries by Seattle scored, it would have made a huge difference in the game, easily. Granted, though, that's why we have TMO. The TMO is supposed to prevent tries from happening that weren't legally allowed. But if we were playing last year when we didn't have a TMO, those tries would have happened. They would have scored, and again, the game would have been completely different. So, not the cleanest of wins, but still, LA looking like the LA team of last year, still dealing with a lot of injuries. They just recently lost one of their great players, Angus Cottrell, who was one of the top try scorers of last year, to a really bad knee injury against San Diego last week. So still dealing with a lot of injuries, still waiting for a lot of players to arrive or to finally debut in this year, including DTH Vandermeer, Matt Guiteau. But yet they are finding a way of forming what they have right now into a cohesive, really strong unit, and they are starting to find their stride. Again, now that we have the rest of the season, LA is one of those teams which they weren't looking very hot, now kind of moving their way up, and they can easily be in the playoff picture by the time next week, because they're going to be going against the Dallas Jackals next weekend. So that's points kind of already in the hand for LA. So LA knocking on the door in the Western Conference, as well as knocking on the door for the elite row of our power rankings. Number 4, the third team and final team to have a bye, the number 1 team in the West, the Austin Gilgronis. And now we have a mix-up or a movement in the top 3. First of all, the biggest shakeup in the top 3, the new number 3, the Toronto Arrows, pulling off a huge victory over Rugby New York. Again, as I mentioned with Rugby New York, the game was not the cleanest game. A lot of sloppiness. Weather did kind of play a little factor. It rained. It snowed. It stopped. It came. It went. It was definitely not the best of conditions, but it's kind of the way the game is played. And again, the Arrows really looked like the more aggressive of the team. What also really helped with the Arrows is they scored 2 of their tries underneath the uprights, so they were automatic 7 points, and that was the difference. 14-10 was the score. If Rugby New York was able to convert, Sam Windsor was able to convert the 2 tries, it would have been a tie game and a completely different game. Sam Windsor, kind of note, Sam Windsor, still I believe the top scorer player in all of MLR history of all time, and was the top point scorer of last season, has not been looking like himself since moving from Houston to Rugby New York, and it's been a little bit interesting. And again, those missed 2 conversions made a big difference in the game, something that Rugby New York may have to kind of really take a look at going into next week's game. Now, the showdown between the number 1 and the number 2 rankings over the weekend proved to be an exciting game. It definitely was. I predicted the game was going to be the match of the weekend, and it truly was. And there's some great games this weekend too. But in the end, when the dust was settled, we have a new number 1. So that means the number 2 team now is Rugby ATL, who unfortunately lost to your new number 1 team, the New England Free Jacks. Now, again, I have to admit, my preseason prediction, I had the Free Jacks, I had Atlanta up there with Rugby New York as the 3 teams fighting for those playoff spots, but I really felt that the Free Jacks were going to be the bottom of the 3. They have been playing amazing. They have really been proven to be the number 1 team of the league, and they proved it by taking out Rugby ATL. I felt it was really impressive with the Free Jacks, no more so than being a man down with one of them in the sin bid, and yet, even though they're at a one-man disadvantage, they still scored 17 points, 17 unanswered points against Rugby ATL. They looked dominant from the start. Kudos to Mitch Wilson of the New England Free Jacks. He had a great game that game. 15 points, 4 for 4 off of the tee, including a try as well. New England Free Jacks just totally beat down Atlanta, 41-27. Very, very impressive win. And they are now your new number 1 ranked team in our power rankings. So, as always, I am always curious to hear what your thoughts are on my power rankings. Do you agree with it? Is your favorite team up near the top or near the bottom? Again, you never know. The beauty of this season of MLR is it truly is anyone's game at any time. Never thought that the Arrows were going to go into Hoboken and beat Rugby New York. I really didn't think Houston was going to beat Utah either. It's you never know. You never know any game. There is no sure thing. But and a lot of teams have a chance to move up. LA at one point was, I believe, number 9, and they have now gotten their way to number 5. Arrows as well. Arrows was one of the bottom teams, and now they're in the top 3. But at the same time, you can have teams start to slide down. Seattle started off at the top and now is coming down to near the bottom. It's what makes rugby and the MLR so exciting. So once again, these are my power rankings for week number 8. Hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts on it are. And as always, thank you very much for watching my video, and I will see you on the pitch.